Nickie Aiken.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituency, the cities of London and Westminster, as you will see week after week, tends to be the epicentre for political protest in this country. It is hardly surprising, as it is home to the government, to Parliament and to the UK's financial heart in the City of London. So I'm sure that many honourable and right honourable members can imagine the effective management of protests, particularly the most disruptive, is of interest to my constituents. They have first-hand knowledge of having to negotiate their daily lives with the rights of others to protest. In the hundreds of letters and emails I have received from constituents highlighting the disruption they have suffered during the days and weeks of organised protests, not one has called for the right to protest to be curbed. When it comes to public order, I think it is especially important to ask ourselves why the measures outlined in this bill are proper and necessary. What has been made clear to me by both the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police is that existing legislation has not kept pace with the evolving tactics of modern-day protesters. And specifically, the lack of a lock-on offence makes it almost impossible for the police to balance lawful protest with basic civil rights. Provisions in this bill will change this. Indeed, clauses 1 and 2 will allow police to preemptive stop highly disruptive and in some cases dangerous lock-ons. Clause 1 is of particular importance. It will make locking on an offence where such an act causes or is capable of causing serious disruption. And I think this is absolutely right. We have seen individuals glue themselves to vehicles or use lock-on devices on the public highway. Last August, we saw these tactics being used by protesters on Tower Bridge, which brought parts of central London to a standstill for hours. Protesters have encased their arms in tubes filled with concrete and locked themselves onto makeshift structures at huge height. We have seen reports of some protesters inserting nails and blades into these pipes in an effort to make removing them more difficult and dangerous for our police officers. Madam Deputy Speaker, we cannot overlook the real concerns of thousands of ordinary people who are disrupted by demonstrations that go well beyond what is necessary. In fact, I utterly disagree with the suggestion that just because you agree with a cause, then the disruptive activity is right. It is not. Such protesters use tactics using lock-on devices are not just inconvenient for many, they can have real-life consequences. Emergency vehicles unable to attend 999 calls, missed hospital appointments, the inability for someone to get to a dying loved one to say goodbye. What also continues to frustrate me and many of my constituents is that police officers involved in the policing these protests are taken away from policing their local neighbourhoods and concentrating on their local police priorities. It is not just Westminster and the City of London police being taken away from their daily duties. During a number of major days during long protests, I have seen officers in Westminster from the home counties, from Bedfordshire, policing central London. I have even come across police vans in Covent Garden with the words heavily on them. That is Welsh for police. Removing lock-on devices safely requires specialist policing teams to be deployed to deal with what can be high-risk environments, taking time and significant resources. For just one protest group, Extinction Rebellion, we saw a total of 54 days of protests across 2019, 2020 and 21, costing some £1.2 million a day. So to this end, I welcome clause 2 of the bill. This provision would allow for officers to act on reasonable suspicion that satisfies visual and intelligence-based qualifications to prevent the use of highly dangerous lock-ons. Since the publication of the bill, I have listened to arguments which claim this offence is not necessary. Willful obstruction of the highway and abrogated trespass are two such laws. To an extent, this is true. However, all of this is only applicable after assembly of the structure. And by this point, we will have seen a chain of events that will ultimately lead to serious impositions on the surrounding area, businesses and local people. The sticking point that we saw in the Lords with the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act were provisions specifically relating to noise or limiting freedoms of expression. And I absolutely recognise this. And on this kind of legislation, I accept that we need to reach an agreement that satisfies both this and the other place. However, I want to stress that clauses 1 and 2 of this bill are absolutely necessary to rebalance lawful protest with civic rights. After all, the duty of the police in relation to non-violent protests is to take a balanced and impartial approach towards all those involved in or affected by protest that is consistent with both human rights law and other domestic legislation. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must ensure lawful protest and everyday life can both continue without the basic rights of either being infringed upon. And I believe the proposed public order bill does exactly that.